This week on Arizona Illustrated, after returning from Iraq, this veteran thought his most difficult days were behind him, but nothing had prepared him for the battle he would face back home. The Boneyard, stories behind some of the aircraft and the pilots who flew them, and an illustrated history of Arizona. Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. In our first story tonight, we continue our focus on veterans, men and women who served and now call Arizona home. Over the past few years, millions of veterans have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. Many found the transition back to life at home challenging. Tucson native Ricardo Pereda served in Iraq for one tense, traumatic year. When he came home, a new battle began.
I couldn't take it. At 23, I got people telling me, you're young, you got your whole life in front of you and stuff like that, but I feel like I'm 80 years old inside. I feel dead already. Why not just seal the deal and end this hurt, this pain that I'm feeling, this pain that I'm causing everybody else, my loved ones and everybody. Why not just end it? When I got my gun, I had everything laid out, and I sat there.
4 years before, Ricardo Pereda had joined the U.S. Army Military Police Corps in hopes of following in his grandfather's footsteps.
My dad was in the service, and he and my dad were the best of friends. And he wanted to do what Dad did.
When September 11th happened, I signed up originally to go to Afghanistan. That's where the people were that attacked us. That's where everybody was saying that's where they are. So I signed up and, yeah, let's go to Afghanistan.
Pereda found himself deployed to Iraq instead in 2004.
Combat wasn't hard. That's survival right there. The hard part is wondering when it's going to be you. When is it going to be you that gets hit by the V-bid or the IED or the sniper? That's the hard part, not knowing.
One night, Pereda's squad fired on a suspicious truck. Pereda performed first aid on the driver, a confirmed insurgent who had been shot more than 18 times, and wound up saving his life. While Pereda's squad was away, another squad took their mission. They were hit with an explosive that caused devastating injuries, and a friend of Pereda's was among the injured.
Here I am, saving this, person, and my buddy who takes our mission ends up getting hit. And when we came back and I found that out, I went in his hooch and I cried.
After a year in Iraq, Ricardo Pereda came home.
Most often, what I see when veterans come home is usually about the first year is pretty much okay. They're real happy to be home. And usually at about a year to 18 months, what I would term the wheels start to fall off.
I was angry. I'd go on rages, I'd go out to the bars and look for fights. On the streets, look for fights. You look at me wrong, like, let's go. I wanted something to get that adrenaline back and get that feeling back.
He was agitated, nervous, paranoid. We went to the grocery store and he saw a yard sale sign and flung over into the other lane and took a different route because he thought it was a IED.
When I was going through that, about a year and a half after I got back, my wife had enough, I guess. And when she left, it was like the bottom of the bucket just dropped out.
In the process of applying for disability benefits, Pareda came across letters from his family members detailing the changes they'd seen in him.
It was so devastating. You know, I couldn't believe, you know, what I had become, you know, and how I was treating them. And I was like, is this it? You know, is this how I'm gonna live the rest of my life?
That day, Pareda wrote a letter of apology to his loved ones and held a gun to his head.
Hand shaking, finger on and off the trigger. And I just got this thought, like, looking at the letters, like, you know, I'm thinking, I'm here, I'm like thinking about blowing my damn head off, apologizing for bringing all this grief and sorrow to my family, but yet I'm gonna be putting more on them by taking my life. I couldn't do it. You know, thank God.
The analogy I often use is when they were civilians, if somebody was shooting at them, if somebody were to shoot at us, our natural tendency is going to be to run away, right? Get away from harm. In the military, you're taught if somebody's shooting at you, you actually run towards the fire because that's how you break an ambush. Treatment is much like that. You have to go towards the pain to get through it.
I went through a very difficult period, to be sure, of about 4 years where I was just lost. It wasn't for the people who loved me, who were telling me, you know, you need to seek help. You need to get out there and go to these you know, therapy programs and stuff like that. You need to talk to somebody. I wouldn't be here.
In 2010, Pareda decided to enroll in the University of Arizona. It was there that he found the UA Veterans Education and Transition Services Center, or VET Center.
They plucked him out of line. He was waiting in line to register, and they said, oh, we'll fast track this for you, come on. And so they took him to the VET Center, and they got his schedule all set, and it was a very warm and welcoming place. So he got completely involved in the VET Center, and that is what saved his life.
I wrapped myself up in it. I found a release. Yeah, I found something that I could give back to that was also giving back to me.
Pareda eventually helped lead the expansion of the VET Center. He has since scaled back his work with the center, but he remains an outspoken advocate for veterans' issues.
We as a country, also the military, we give them the illusion you're going to go off and, you know, be exposed to all this stuff, and you're going to come home and be the same again, rather than you're going to be changed. What you do with that change determines whether it's, quote, good or bad. They joined to be of service to the country, and so if they have that, a place to be of service, then they do really well.
I look back at where I've come from, you know, and where I'm at now, and the role that I've been able to play in other people's lives, you know, and what I've been able to see as far as helping other people come out of that hellhole. You know, it's been a roller coaster, you know, but I want to change it for the world.
Anyone growing up in Arizona from the 1950s through the 70s knew about the state's 5 C's: copper, cattle, climate, cotton, and citrus. At its peak around 1970, Arizona citrus growers had 80,000 acres in production. And as you'll see in our next story, the marketing of that fruit is a unique lens through which to view over a century of Arizona's history.
My mom worked as a shipping clerk for a grapefruit packing house in Yuma, Arizona. My father worked for the state of Arizona as a farm labor specialist. My own background was in fresh produce. I often saw lots of different labels on wooden boxes that really intrigued me. I decided I need to take those home to my wife because she's studying to be an art teacher. I'm John Medley. I live in Oracle, Arizona, and I collect Arizona citrus crate labels. At one point I got to thinking, why have I started collecting these old crate labels? And a little bit of introspection led me to realize that, oh, I get it, I've been around produce almost all my life. Why shouldn't I have a collection of such things? For me, the most surprising aspect of the illustrations in the label collection are actually the history of Arizona that can be told when viewing or studying these illustrations. Primarily, there was three different styles of artwork. There was the naturalistic period, advertising period, and then there was the commercial art period. The naturalistic period focused primarily on actual items of nature. This would be an illustration designed to appeal to a housewife who would be thinking that she would be able to set a very Victorian-style table. Another crate label used is this desert brand. In its appearance, we have Camelback Mountain without any residence on it. The advertising era basically consisted of a prominent brand name and an image that purchasers would remember. In the marketing of Arizona, they attempted to show that there was plenty of water. Designers of Arizona crate labels featuring Native American subjects were often influenced by photographs from several decades earlier. As part of my research material, I just can't help but make the assumption that the crate label designer had access to the Vroman photographs. It was more of a surprise than anything, and it was quite satisfying. I felt like I had discovered something that nobody else knew. In the collection, I have what I believe to be rather stereotypical illustrations of gender themes, racial themes. I think they were trying to appeal to all the different potential customers for their oranges and grapefruit, but they're just emblematic of things that were present in the society during the time that these crate labels were illustrated. Illustrations of Arizona oranges and grapefruit crate labels were designed by primarily anonymous artists working for the various lithograph companies in California. There are only one or two labels that I'm aware of where the illustrator was known, designed by Bert Anthony, who was an artist employed by the Walt Disney Studios. When I first saw this illustration, I thought, Sun Devil. Consolidated Citrus Growers must have decided to make Sparky the Sun Devil their mascot. And then I got out my magnifying glass and I saw the date. It led me to realize that this label was designed at least 3 years prior to the design of the current Sparky the Sun Devil designed by Disney Studios. In the commercial era of crate labels, brand name became primary and illustration became secondary. The end of the era of the paper crate label came about in 1955 with the widespread adoption by the produce industry of the labor-saving, more economical pre-printed cardboard carton. When I stop and take a look at the collection, I begin to wonder, okay, I'm a mature senior citizen now. What do I think I should do with this? At this specific moment, I have no idea, but I know that it shouldn't just languish in my house without a plan. Ultimately, I'm really surprised that I was successful in what I set out to do, which was establish the largest privately held archive of Arizona citrus material.
It's one of the most recognizable landmarks in Tucson, yet it's one of the least understood. Sprawling over 2,600 acres in southeast Tucson, adjacent to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, is what's affectionately known as the Boneyard. The over 4,000 aircraft stored there are part of the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, and every one of them has a story.
Before I started working here, I knew the same thing everyone else knew, that the Boneyard was a place that airplanes came to die. And that was it. It was just a parking lot, and they sat out here for 10 years and then eventually became soda pop cans and razor blades and other useful items. Airplanes don't just come here to die. About a third of the aircraft that are stored as regeneration candidates are going to fly out again, for us or for our foreign allies.
There's old planes and new planes, jets and props, fighters and transports, fixed wing and wingless. Some are just taking a rest before rejoining their units. Others keep their brethren aloft by donating parts. A few have given all they can and are moving from the boneyard to the scrapyard. All the aircraft are here for a purpose, and each with its own story.
This airplane is a B-52H, and one of the changes to the later models of B-52, the G and the H models, was that the tail got shorter and fatter. One of the things they were doing to test this new vertical tail was flying back and forth in the eastern slope of the Rockies. This airplane in flight lost its tail, it broke off because of wind shear and turbulence, and the aircraft remained flyable thanks to the help of the Boeing engineers that were on the radio. And it flew back to Missouri where the weather was too difficult to land, so they subsequently went on to Arkansas. The airplane flew for 5 hours with no tail.
The aircraft here are under the care of hundreds of mechanics, engineers, technicians, and support staff of the 309th. And it's not a coincidence that they are here in the Sonoran Desert.
The Boneyard was established in 1947. It was picked primarily for two reasons. The climate is the first one. As you can imagine, storing all this metal, you want a dry climate so it doesn't corrode. The second reason is because of the ground. The 6 inches down from the normal ground is this thick clay, caliche, and that helps us stabilize the aircraft so that we don't have to put down concrete or any other kind of structure, and we can just roll the aircraft onto the ground. The oldest aircraft is a 1952 B-57 aircraft, and our newest aircraft are F-16s.
And there are lots of F-16s. Many, after being awakened from their desert slumber, pampered and updated, are being refurbished for flight. As with each of the thousands of planes here, the pilots often have the closest bonds to their battle mates.
It's an amazing airplane. They did a phenomenal job designing it. It's very simple to operate. It's a real pilot's aircraft. Being a small guy like I am, it's the first military aircraft. I've flown 7 different aircraft that actually fits me just fine. And it's an unbelievable combat performer. I've flown the aircraft in combat, and it's never let me down. And I think the aircraft that you spend the most amount of time in is usually the one you end up loving the most.
Prior to the F-16, the Phantom F-4 saw regular combat for the United States during the Vietnam War. There, during the 1960s and 70s, they engaged in dogfights with enemy MiG fighters. Some F-4s were flown off of aircraft carriers where they were stowed on deck right next to one another.
And the interesting thing about this airplane and its mate just over there is that they took off together from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk on the 6th of May in 1972. Both of them were out over North Vietnam, and they were engaged by MiG-21s, and each of them shot down a MiG-21. So they were together that day, May 6th of 1972, and here they are 40 years later at the Boneyard, and they're 50 feet apart.
If these planes could talk, most of the tales they would tell would probably have to do with in-flight adventures, but not all.
This airplane is a modified C-130 called the LC-130, and it was modified to support our operations in Antarctica. It flew from New Zealand down there and would land on the snow and ice. You can see that it has skis instead of landing gears. And this particular airplane landed down there and then was getting ready to take off when the engine broke, and it caused some damage to the aircraft, so they ended up leaving it down there. It stayed 17 years in Antarctica and was covered by snow and ice. And eventually, the Navy decided to fly it out, so they took an engine down there, put it on the aircraft, flew it out, and it flew again back and forth between New Zealand and Antarctica for 10 more years before coming here for its well-deserved retirement.
Not every aircraft at the Boneyard had long, distinguished careers prior to their retirement here. A few served for just a short time, including a one-of-a-kind behemoth with a unique mission, whose first flight was in 2002.
This is the airborne laser. It's a modified Boeing 747 cargo aircraft and was used by the Ballistic Missile Defense Office to answer the question, hey, I wonder if we can detect, track, and engage ballistic missiles in the boost phase. The answer $2.5 billion later is yes. And if you see the other side of the aircraft, you'll see the scorecard that it has. The Ballistic Missile Defense Office did lose its funding because with elections, there are changes in priorities.
Less than 10 years later, the airborne laser flew its last flight here to the Boneyard. Understandably, it's the pilot and crew chief who keep the aircraft closest to their hearts.
It arrived on the 28th of July.
It hadn't been here a day or two before I got a hold of you then, I guess.
Let's go see your plane.
Jack Catalini is one of a very few Army pilots who flew jets. Jets flown into dangerous locations with special VIPs, senators, and Army bigwigs as passengers. Jack's Gulfstream was unmarked and undercover, disguised as your run-of-the-mill corporate jet.
It was a first for all of us. The Army never had jets. First time in something that can go up to 41,000 feet. Most of us spent our first half of our career flying helicopters. We never got more than about 1,500 feet off the ground. We've died and gone to heaven. This is as good as it gets for helicopter pilots. This was our last assignment. We had worked our way up. For me, at the end of that, it was 28 years in the military. We feel like they're ours, no matter whether we're all retired or not. It just doesn't get any better. It's just a wonderful airplane to fly.
With each addition to the inventory, another tale comes to rest in this corner of the desert. And while the grounds of the Boneyard may become crowded, there's always plenty of room for the stories.
For the University of Arizona basketball program, the 1982-83 season was one to forget. The Wildcats' record was a dismal 4 wins and 24 losses. Its Pac-10 record of 1-17 still stands as the worst in team history. But help was on the way, as we see in this episode of From the Vault.
In hiring Lute Olson, Arizona now has the winningest coach in Iowa history. He was National Coach of the Year in 1980, Big Ten Coach of the Year in 1979 and 1981. In 10 years as a head coach, Olson's record is 191 wins, 93 losses. He took Iowa into the NCAA regional playoffs 5 times, including this season.
I don't think there's anyone more highly respected in the field of intercollegiate athletics in the area of basketball than Lute. And that comes from his peers. It comes from people with whom he's been associated with.
At least 50 candidates applied for the UA post. Dempsey said that fact should quell any charges that no one would want to take over the basketball program after this past season. Dempsey first met Olson last Friday night after Iowa lost to Villanova in the NCAA Midwest Regional Semifinals. Last Saturday, they talked for 5 to 6 hours. An agreement followed quickly. For Lute Olson, it was a time to move on.
So I think the time is right. I guess we've had great success at Iowa. We've had tremendous support. We've had tremendous young people with which to work, and I have always been a firm believer, whether it was in high school or junior college or in college, that you build a program with good people.
Olson will meet with returning U of A players very soon. He said he will begin immediately the task of recruiting new basketball talent, part of the job of rebuilding the program.
We will work as hard, I guess, as we can work to try to provide a first-class program. And the work will have to begin, obviously, immediately.
Olson signed a one-year contract as mandated by state law. He said he was given no specific commitment, but he said Dempsey promised he will give Olson time to get the basketball program back into shape.
I have a great deal of confidence in the people that I have met with Dr. Dempsey, with the committee, that they recognize that it is not going to be a case of waving a wand and suddenly it's going to happen. It's going to take a great deal of time and effort to get it going, but the challenge is really, to me at this point, a very exciting thing.
A reminder that you can watch all Arizona Illustrated stories on our webpage, azpm.org. And thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. Next week, a special presentation of Arizona Illustrated. Raptors, kings of the sky, majestic birds of prey face an uncertain future as their world increasingly intersects with daily human life. Watch as these magnificent predators learn to adjust and even thrive on Raptors, Kings of the Sky, next week on Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.